issues and challenges we face in trying to deal with this problem of violence in our community. Let me just say, again, my name is Johnny Muhammad. I'm a longtime community activist and community development practitioner. Worked on the South Side for a very long time. Grew up in public housing, grew up among people and communities that had a very loving and caring attitude about one another as neighbors, but we also had that element in our community that was prone to inflicting violence on one another. Came up out of it and trying to do the best that I can to reinvest in our community, in our people, in our neighborhoods, to try to address some of these serious challenges that we face. In both Muslim and Christian tradition, there is a saying that where there is two or more, God is right there in between. And it seems as though the room is starting to fill up a little bit, so let's hope that the peace and blessings and spirit of God comes over us to really address some of these issues that we face, all right? Now, we want to really get into the nits and grits of this problem. And today we have a panel of people, some of whom are present. Others will be joining us as we have this dialogue. But in kind of framing this issue, I think it's pretty apparent to all of us, sadly, that our community appears to be having a nervous breakdown, a serious nervous breakdown. And we are experiencing self-inflicted violence almost on a daily basis. And I think all of us have understood this whole concept of shock value. Shock value can have a positive effect, but it can also have a negative effect. And it appears as though the negative shock value of this self-inflicted violence is having no impact on us as a people. When we hear about children like the infant Janila, who was killed as she was being changed by her father in a van, and then Hydea Pendleton, and then Darren Albert. The youth, the infants are dying, and the negative shock value of it doesn't seem to be altering the state of mind of our people. And this self-inflicted violence is creating scars in our community and in ourselves that are deep and they're permanent. Anybody in here that has lost a loved one knows how permanent that scar is when you lose somebody. And we're losing people every day. And it appears to be consistent and permanent. So we really want to examine this today and figure out what's going on inside our community, how it's taking place, and how we can empower ourselves to begin to address it. Before we get started, I want to just read, I have 3 pages of names of the 2013 murder victims in the city of Chicago. I just want to read about a half a page. Black male, 23 years old, Johnny Taylor. Black male, Tyrone Soulberry, 39 years old. Black male, Marcus Wallace, 23 years old. Ray Durantes, white male, 14 years old. Victor Vega, white male, 15 years old. Damian Barnes, black male, 22 years old. Gregory Beatty, black male, 28 years old. Curtis Porter, black male, 51 years old. And by the way, all of those were gunshots. Tyrone Lawson, black male, 17-year-old, died of a gunshot. Claudia Martinez, white female, 35 years old, arson. Marshall Field Hall, black male, 21 years old, gunshot. Javante Alexander, 19-year-old black male, gunshot. Layla Stewart, 2-year-old black female, child abuse. Elton Johnson, black male, 35-year-old, gunshot. Ronald Peters, 50-year-old black male, gunshot. Ronnie Chambers, 33-year-old black male, gunshot. Alan Smiley, 41-year-old black male, gunshot. Willie Wilson, 33-year-old black male, stabbing. Norman Stokes, 38-year-old black male, gunshot. Dimitri Buford, 32-year-old black male, gunshot. Antonio Finner, 16-year-old black male, gunshot. Gino Agati, 20-year-old white male, gunshot. Devon Common, 28-year-old black male, gunshot. Hydea Pendleton, 15-year-old black female, gunshot. Michelle Smith, 32-year-old female, gunshot. Manuel Hernandez, white male, 21-year-old, gunshot. Salvador Ponce, 31-year-old white male, gunshot. Sergio Mora, 19-year-old white male, gunshot. That's as much as I'm going to read now, but I should also mention that just last night we had 3 victims, 17-year-old, a 22-year-old, and a 29-year-old. This is tragic, to say the least, and we need to figure out how to get our people that are out there in here. And once we get them in here, then we need to figure out how to get in here. That's what we have to do. So to help us to kind of dissect this and at least examine the phenomenon, we have a panel of people, and I'm just going to read who we have here. And once I come across your name, if you are present, I want to have you take your place up here on the dais, okay? We have Attorney Bart Beals. He's a Chicago native. He's practiced law for over half a decade, has extensive experience in the areas of criminal defense and landlord and tenant matters. Mr. Beals, his path of career in practicing law was untraditional. He started out his professional career after college in the areas of sales and community advocacy. The importance of a dedicated advocate was thrust home on a personal level when he was unjustly arrested for a minor infraction that wasn't punishable with jail time. The incident motivated Mr. Beals to go to law school to become a lawyer in order to protect the rights of ordinary citizens. Attorney Beal is a member of the New Black Leadership Coalition and on the Legal Advisory Council of the Street Peace Coalition. Brother Beals, welcome. We have also Dialob Noon Lumumba. He is a longtime resident and native West Sider. He's a community elder and activist, street legend, advocate for black nationalism and black empowerment. He is a key member of the steering committee of the Street Peace Coalition. Brother Lumumba. Okay, glad to have you, brother. Student Minister Caleb Muhammad, he's a native West Sider. He has been officially commissioned as a minister directly by the Honorable Louis Farrakhan since 2002. He has worked relentlessly in the community for more than 10 years. As the representative of the Nation of Islam on Chicago's West Side, he is also a member of the steering committee of the Street Peace Coalition. How you doing, brother? Okay. Do we have anybody else here? Anybody else here? No. All right. Some of the other panelists will be joining us, but I am going to go ahead. All right. I'm just going to read who will be joining us because they are supposed to be coming in as the afternoon progresses. Elder Dr. Michael Eady. Pastor Eady is a person of integrity as an astute, innovative thinker, visionary leader, and people builder. He's also a noted Bible teacher, preacher, and conference speaker. He's a man of God who has God's people at heart. Pastor Eady's mission in the ministries is to alleviate the downward plight of individuals and to empower people to reach their fullest potential. As President and Chief Executive Officer of the People's Community Development Association of Chicago, the Community Development Corporation of People's Church, he has formulated a custodial building maintenance training and computer literacy program with a job placement component, okay? And he focuses on equipping the hard to employ individuals and ex-offenders with life skills. Okay, so Elder Eady will be joining us. We have just been joined by Brother Lance Williams. Lance Williams is an assistant director of Northeastern Illinois University Jacob H. Carruthers Center for Inner City Studies and an associate professor of Inner City Studies Education. Dr. Williams also serves as national coordinator of the African American Male Initiative for the President's Roundtable. He's the author of Culture and Perceptions of Violence-Related Behaviors Among Adolescents and co-author with Natalie Moore of the forthcoming book, The Almighty Black Pea Stone Nation, The Fall and Rise and Resurgence of an American Gang. At Northeastern, Dr. Williams teaches critical analysis of hip-hop culture, the history and culture of ethnic groups, elite theory and American democracy, and inner-city organizations and institutions. He's a co-founder of New Black Leadership Coalition and chairman of the board of the Lupe Fiasco Foundation. Okay, Brother Lance Williams. You can come on up and join us, brother. Okay. We also expect to be joined later by Attorney Lou Myers. Many of you know who he is. His affiliations include, but certainly are not limited to, NAACP, United League of Mississippi, Nation of Islam, Black Lawyers Association, Operation Push. In recent days, Attorney Myers continues to be a staple in the African American community by fighting against police brutality and other injustices that befall the community. And then Twan Gabbs is also expected to be a panelist too. He's put an immense amount of work into the Chicago hip hop scene, which has given us some of music's most creative wordsmiths, such as Common, Lupe Fiasco, Rhyme Fest, Kanye West. Gabbs is definitely from the same school of thought as his fellow Chi-Town natives in regard to being an undeniable lyricist, having written songs and worked with Kanye, Rhyme Fest, DJ Terry Hunter, and No ID, just to name a few. However, he has a different story and perspective to tell the world. Okay? I'm going to stop right here with the introductions, and we're going to go to our panelists and really kind of look at some of these pressing issues. Okay? I don't know if you all have an agenda in front of you. I have one in front of me, so I'm going to go by my agenda. And that is to allow the speakers to basically give a 10-minute overview or presentation. And it doesn't necessarily have to be 10. It could be something shorter than that since we are kind of running behind. But just your reflections on some of the challenges that we're facing with regard to the violence that we see exhibited in our community on almost a daily basis. And why don't we start from the end and work our way back toward the podium? So I want to allow Brother Lance Williams to first have a few comments, and then we'll work this way, and then we'll have some questions from myself, and then we're going to open it up to the audience. Okay? Brother Lance Williams.
Thank you very much, brother. First, I want to thank everyone for coming out, and I want to give a particular thanks to Minister Michael Muhammad for organizing this event and inviting me here to share what I have to share regarding this information. Just for a little background, so for many of you who may not know who I am, my background actually comes from the West Side. My father was born and raised on the West Side, was a member of a little small group called the 14th Street Clovers, which ended up being one of the small groups that kind of evolved into the Vice Lord Nation. And this is around the 50s, the late 50s, going into the 60s, when my father and a group of his buddies who were former members of the organization got an opportunity to become a part of social media, not a social media group, but social service organizations like the YMCA, and they served as what they call outreach workers. And detached workers really was the term that they used. So it's kind of like the outreach workers from Ceasefire. So that was the first form of what you would have in Ceasefire today that went all the way back to the 50s. And it was the model that those brothers put together that Gary Slutkin, who founded Ceasefire, some people would say borrowed from, some people would say stole that concept, right? But the difference between what those brothers did, those older vice lords and disciples and stones formulating the organization Lord, Stones, and Disciples, the difference between what they did back then and what happens today is that they were drawn from a social, cultural, political movement. So y'all remember the Black Power movement was going on during that time. The civil rights movements were happening. And so those movements had impacted what was happening on the street. So the average brother that was on the street in the 50s and 60s was drawing from the concept of Black Power, which is a big difference when you move in the mindset of Black Power and empowering your community. Even if you're a gangbanger, you recognize that, you know, your activities and your actions should be about empowering yourself and your community. Versus what's happening today, people who may be a part of these street organizations are not drawn from the concept of Black empowerment. They're drawn off of the concept of self-empowerment. So my work growing up under my father and being out on the streets with him when he was working with the brothers that were affiliated with these different street organizations, it was a cultural mindset that they had that was different from what's going on today. So as it relates to what's happening with violence, in my opinion, is that we have a cultural problem, that we have too many young brothers and sisters who they are identifying themselves with a mentality and a mindset that works in the disinterest of themselves and their community. So instead of seeing themselves as vanguards to protect the Black community, they see themselves as gangsters, first and foremost. They see themselves as thugs, and they represent that from a popular mindset. In other words, this is what's popular to them. And the problem is when you take that mindset, there's a mentality that goes with that, a mentality that does not reflect a respect for each other, right? If you listen to how the young brothers talk to each other today, it's even when they're socializing in a friendly way, they refer to each other in terms that from our generation growing up was almost, we would perceive as fighting terms. So you see them calling each other, you know, the B word and calling each other out their names and threatening each other on a regular basis. Mark, I'll smack you. You know, this is how they socialize with each other. And this has become a part of their culture. And whenever you got that kind of mentality where you are working from threats and intimidation and emasculation, then that causes tension and friction. And when that tension and friction rises to a certain level, especially if you're doing this and you don't have a sense of manhood, then what follows that is fear. And what's happening on these streets today is that there's a lot of fear among young brothers, and the way that they deal with each other is, if they're intimidated, one of the ways that they deal with the person that's intimidating them is they sneak them. So it ain't no just face-to-face, head-up kind of stuff no more. It's because I'm afraid of you, then what I got to do is make sure that I deal with you in a way that I feel like you don't have an opportunity to retaliate. So that's why you see a lot of drive-bys. You see a lot of, somebody walking up on somebody before they get a chance to recover and pop them. And then as a matter of fact, as I was coming up Central right now, just here, it was one little shorty, I think he may have been back here someplace, had something happen, and he was running to the L. And about 15 or 16 of them was chasing him. And right as they was getting ready to get him up on the L, the police showed up. So these are the kind of things that's going on. If they could have got hold to him, we may be looking at another homicide. So it's the way they deal with each other. They playing with each other out here on the court with each other, but the way they talk to each other is in an emasculating, disrespectful way. So I think the mindsets we have to change of our young people, how they see themselves, how they interact with each other, and that's very difficult because in the black community, we don't control the culture of our community. So when I say the culture, we don't control how they think. This is what influences black youth today. Number one, what happens in the household influences them more than anything else. But the problem is that if what's happening in the household ain't healthy, then they're going to have a negative influence from the house. The second thing that influences them, and the most powerful thing, is the media, how they see themselves, the music that they listen to. They drawn from a music that is perpetuating violence, right? So they listening to Flocka, right? They listening to Rick Ross. They listening to Jeezy and all of these little rappers that's driving their mindset around violence, right? And so, and then the third thing is how they interact with their peers, right? But all of that is controlled by the media and the institutions that drive the mindset of what black males are. And until we can control those institutions, we're not going to be able to control those mindsets, because those institutions control what happens on a broad scale. The mass media. So that's what I would contribute to this conversation. We have to build institutions that affect culture. I think and I'm gonna stop right here. The number one thing that we need to do if we want to solve problems for our youth is we have to build, I would say, you have to build educational institutions, but not just education, because it's got to be a spiritual manifestation and a social manifestation that goes with that. But schools are a good example, but not a normal kind of school. I think we need boarding schools. We need schools where our kids, particularly young brothers, go to and they live at, right? And they stay with us over an extended period of time, so you can shape their mindset. And then once you do that, then you don't have to worry. When they come out, they'll have the mindset to liberate themselves in their community. So I think that's something that we need to be focusing on, building boarding schools for black males.
Yes, sir. I want to as well thank Minister Michael and the Street Peace Coalition, which I am also a member of. And Dr. Lance, you ended right up where I wanted to start. We're facing, of course, many problems that we can attribute to what's going on in the time. But as you started with education, that's what I wanted to deal with. Me being a student at Honorable Mr. Louis Farrakhan, when I go back in our history, when the Honorable Elijah Muhammad started back in the 30s, one thing he realized was that we had to take our children out of the schools of the enemies. Mm-hmm. And there's an old saying said that the most powerful weapon in the hand of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. Mm-hmm. And so he understood then, and some of our older pioneer Muslims, as we call them, went to jail, actually, for taking our children out of the school system of our enemy and putting them in a school of themselves. Mr. Farrakhan oftentimes gives us an example, say when someone takes a picture of you and whoever you are in that picture, the first person you look for in that picture is yourself. And so until the educational system reflects our children, they see themselves, they will never really learn from this system. Since that's a hot topic in today's time and what's going on with education, my daughter was sharing with me that one of her teachers, when she got to the part of history, and it was called African American history, that the teacher said to her, "I'm not qualified to teach this part of the history book, so we're going to skip over black history or African American history, and we're going to go on to Hispanic or Latin history." And then it was also said in the same school by a quote-unquote black educator or principal that to teach black history is offensive to other cultures. So we have teachers who look like us who are afraid to stand up and teach our children the true history of themselves. And then we have others who don't know our history. So a lot of our teachers in the past years have lost their jobs, and they are now giving these jobs and teachers positions to unqualified, mainly white women. And so in the educational system, our children are really suffering in these schools. And so I wanted to just say is that based upon that, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad told us that our boys and girls should be separated. Now, like you see urban prep, and you see a lot of them are succeeding now. What our brother King is now doing with urban prep. But he said up until the age of 16, there should be separate schools for male and females because they learn different. They learn and they mature at different times. And so I don't know if y'all remember years ago in like Detroit, and I think in Baltimore, Maryland, they had started separating the males from the females. And these schools were being successful. But what happened was some of our own people said there was discrimination. And they themselves fought to close the schools down, even though they saw improvement primarily in the male child. And so as Brother touched on, within our families, what's going on inside of the household, there's such an attack on our family that I really don't think we understand just how deep this is. And not to take up too much more time, I pulled up some information. And it says vital information about Ritalin, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and the politics behind the ADHD Ritalin movement. And I don't know if we understand, because a lot of us, even as parents, don't have enough time for our children. We really don't want to deal with our children, that we readily recommend that somebody give our children Ritalin without not even understanding the effects of Ritalin on our children. And this was also part of the conspiracy with psychiatrists and others who start to come up with different conditions and disorders that our children not really are suffering from, and prescribe medicine that we went along with. And now through their studies, they show that the medicine now is causing our children to become more violent than they were before that. And what were our children, how they were labeled as young when I was coming up, we didn't call that some ADHD and all that. The children just real active, don't give them too much sugar, or we had to find something for them to do. As men, when I was young, and I'll close with this point, we didn't worry about all of the sinners. This is not the first time in our history that we have been deprived of sinners and certain things to do. We took the vacant lots, and some of the older brothers, and some of them who had gone on, as we call them, wine heads or other negative terms, they took us and they taught us how to play softball. So we would clean up a vacant lot. We would make some homemade bases. And if you ask the children today about a clincher, they say, what is that? And so we played softball, and we would sit back and we would go against another block, against another neighborhood. We would organize a team. And so we were allowed to burn up some of that energy just by playing softball. We couldn't wait till it snowed, because then we played tackle football. So a lot of things that we did for recreation and fun, we have gotten away from that now. And now our children are tied into video games, which promotes that culture of violence that Dr. Lance went into. And so we have to get our house in order, because the children are only reflectors of us. And I am tired of adults, and I close and I promise. I don't think I went 10 minutes, did I, Brother Johnny? I want to just say this part. because this is a deal with education. I heard the news last night worrying about safe passage. And to the men in this room, and this is something I say to a lot of brothers, for us to sit back as men and worrying about our children being safe, saying we're going to see what CPD is going to do or what the Board of Education will say, but we as men should say, our children going to be safe. Mother, you don't have to worry about your children. Mother, you don't have to worry no longer. Our children going to be safe. Some of us have come out of the streets. We know what language to speak, and we know how to put this in check. And so we have to ensure that our children are going to be safe no matter what school they close down. That our children shouldn't have to worry about whether they cross on the other side of Western, other side of Jackson, Cottage Grove. We as men have to stand up right now and say, you safe whatever neighborhood you go to. Because the old song years ago, Self-Destruction, said, I never had to run from a Ku Klux Klan. I shouldn't have to run from a black man. Barry Gunny. Once again, my name is Noon, Dialobe, whichever one you can pronounce better. And I'm a former member of a street organization called Four Corner Hustler Vice Lords. And growing up in that organization, I grew into leadership of the organization. Through the passing of the guys who were leading me. You know, I was out in the street for a minute, but most of my time was spent wrongfully locked up, held hostage, I say, in the Illinois Department of Corrections for 26 years. And while in the Department of Corrections, I had an opportunity through forced isolation. I think I might have spent maybe, out of the 26 years, maybe 18 of them in isolation, segregation, or whatever you want to call it. I had an opportunity to read, and I was fortunate at a young age that I went to Stateville and had the honor of being around one of our great leaders who passed, Bobby Gore, who we call Imani. And during the 70s, early 70s, he introduced us to Islam through the teachings of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And as we were beginning to get into that teachings, and as we were disciplining brothers was beginning to stand up, you know what I'm saying, the literature became illegal to read. And if you get caught with any literature, you would be given 6 months to a year in prison. And let me first acknowledge some people that, some of my fellow members on my Street Peace Coalition. I want to thank them for coming. And we also got a brother who I was a part of putting together an organization which he has represented, and I'm glad to see him here, Save Our Sons, Brother Akeem, and I'm a board member of that as well. And while being held hostage and in isolation, it gave me a lot of opportunity to think, you know, because I had the same self-hate mentality that the average brother have. And believe it or not, even some of us that's conscious still got that little self-hate in us, because when we get mad, first thing we holler is, man, that nigga this or that nigga that, you know. And, you know, it just dawned on me that, you know, our children hear that. You know, growing up every day, they hear, kill a nigga ain't shit, stay away from niggas, don't trust them niggas, you know. Whereas opposed to they don't hear the other side about love yourself, you know what I'm saying? So they grew up with this attitude, okay, that, and I was thinking about this the other day. So I had some children live upstairs from me, they was all over visiting. We got a big backyard, so I put them some like toys and stuff out there, so they was out there playing. So I called all of them to the porch, and I told them, I said, okay, I'm gonna give each one of y'all $1. If one of y'all can just tell me what God looked like. Would you believe all of them raised their hand at one time and all of them said the same thing? And their response was that God is a white man, you know. And I never talked to these children, but if y'all was asked children the same thing, I mean, if our children growing up every day
seeing mama, seeing daddy, grandmama, granddaddy worship this white man on this cross, okay? What do you think they're gonna think? You know what I'm saying? What do you think impressions that's gonna give them in relating to other white people? You know, and if they hearing that a nigga ain't shit, don't trust a nigga, stay away from them niggas, you know, don't hang out with them niggas, what are they gonna think about themselves growing up? You know what I'm saying? In my opinion, that's one of the root causes of the violence that we got out on the street today, self-hate, you know? And not only that, but, you know, speaking on the school issue, you know, what wasn't mentioned is that we had less than, 1% of black male teachers. I grew up, my teachers lived down the street. They lived on Hamlin, they lived on Jackson. You know, we played basketball with them in the evening. We played softball with them, you know what I'm saying, in the evening after school. You know, we hung out with our teachers. We got to know our teachers. And it's a reason for black males not being in schools today. You got, less than, 8% percentage of black female teachers. I mean, if our children is not being taught by us, then how can we expect them to do the right thing? I mean, I watch these children. I work on cars, and I be out working on cars every day, right? It's a big lot. They come through the lot coming from school. And one of the things that I noticed, and I went up to the school myself because I wanted to be certain about this here. One thing I noticed, there's a lot of young homosexual black children growing up, you know? And I'm saying, where's they getting this? We grew up, we didn't see all we see. We might have known 1 or 2 homosexuals in the neighborhood, you know what I'm saying? But now they are in abundance. And I'm saying we all creatures of influence. Children are some of the most influential, you know, people of all, right? So if you got all these, like he mentioned, these white females, okay, which are yuppies for the most part, some of them there just to get their degrees or whatever, you know, with little or no concern about our children, that shouldn't be no secret then why our children is being homosexuals. You know what I'm saying? Or why they out there participating. They're not teaching them no social values. You know what I'm saying? They, you know, it's like he was talking about the games and stuff, video games that they're watching and the language that they use. You know, you go out there, they call each other bees. They call each other, you know, all these other names, but they don't see themselves calling each other niggas. That's being disrespectful, which is more disrespectful than calling each other bitches. You know? That name was given to us to demean us, not to make us some great people, that we come from Niger and all that type of junk they try to tell us. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, I just wanted to say that because I want us to think about the use of that word. And I know oftentimes we don't use the word, those of us who consider ourselves conscious, but as soon as we get mad, we'll say that word nigga. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, we need to definitely be conscious of that word. And I'm thankful to the, I can say this here, that I want to be a leader in the right way. You know what I'm saying? I'm thankful and grateful to the teachings that I got, not only through the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, but being around at a young age, brothers like Michael Shine back there. You know, these were brothers that when I come through the prisons, you know, they had been there. They had, you know, they helped me to be a man. You know, I was a teenager. I was young. You know what I'm saying? I had brothers much bigger than me, much stronger than me. But as opposed to taking advantage, they helped strengthen me. They helped make me the person that I became today. You know, so right now, I'm not an active gang member. However, I do have a little honor and a little respect among some brothers.
I'm going to actually wrap it up.
All right. Okay, I just wanted to say that I'm committed, you know what I'm saying? And if it's getting an opportunity, I want to let this brother speak on his organization, because I think a lot of y'all that's in the area or may not be in the area need to know about it, because we need all the help we can get to stop the violence out in the street. We need it from everybody. I'm not tripping on who can do what. If you good at whatever you do and it's ending violence in our community, I'm 1,000% with you, okay? So I don't care what organization you come from. You can be a Ku Klux Klan. If you can show me how to stop black folks from killing each other, and me and you can be cool. All right, so I'm going to end with that.
Well, a lot's already been said, so as an attorney, I know we're used to talking a lot, so I'm going to try to go against what I'm used to doing. My name is Bart Beals. As was mentioned before, I'm an attorney. I specialize in criminal defense work. And prior to becoming an attorney, I worked as a community organizer, and I also worked as a school teacher. I was born and raised on the south side of Chicago. So I'm very, very familiar with Chicago, and actually, quite frankly, all sides of Chicago. For a brief period of time, I lived on the west side of Chicago. The one thing I just want to say, first and foremost, I've been practicing law for 13 years. 7 of those years have been in criminal defense work. And I am tired. I am tired of seeing a system that is designed for our people to fail. And I'm tired of seeing that system ground up black men and black women alike and spit them out. And all I can do, I'm like a medic with a Band-Aid walking into a battle zone where with a bunch of deadly wounds, and all I can do is put Band-Aids on. And I'm tired of it. And I am actively looking to put myself out of business. Now, the first step that I've seen that is necessary to do so is we talk about education. And, you know, the doctor that talked about, you know, started off with, I think he hit the nail on the head. I think he could not have been more correct. When we talk about education, years ago, I was in the Army Reserves, and I had a African-American drill sergeant. And, you know, I went in the Army Reserves after I graduated from college, so I thought I was some smart stuff. You know, I had a higher rank than everybody else in basic training, and I thought I knew everything. And here this drill sergeant walked up who didn't graduate from college, and he asked me a very simple question that had a very simple answer that I didn't know. And he asked me, he says, well, you know, he asked me, am I educated or am I certified? And I said, well, of course I'm educated. He says, well, what, he's asked me then, he says, okay, well, if that's the case, then what does it mean to be educated? As opposed to what does it mean to be certified? I said, well, if you're educated, because I'm just sitting on my old high horse, back all on my, you know, butt all on my back, thinking I'm something special, saying, well, if you're educated, that means you went to college and you got a degree. And if you're certified, that means you went to some training program and you got a certificate. And he was like, no, wrong. Educated means, you know, to be, quite frankly, if you look into the etymology of education, there's 2 different schools of thought. The majority school of thought of educated means to be trained. The minority rule of thought of educated means to bring out that which is what is within, meaning to be able to think critically, to be able to analyze. Ultimately, our kids, and we included, not just our children, we, quite frankly, ourselves, have been educated our entire lives and will continue to be educated, meaning we are being trained to think a certain way. And a big part of being trained to think a certain way is the media that we're being exposed to. And what, you know, in this media, and we know media makes a big difference. People say video games don't matter. People say the TV doesn't matter. People say that movies don't matter. Books don't matter. But we know it does matter because if you look at just small elements, back when the Cosby Show was out, look at graduation rates. Look at when the Cosby Show, the spinoff from this Cosby Show, It's a Different World. Do you know that applications to historically black colleges was up 400%? Just based on a different world. It wasn't a different world, it wasn't the top rated show, yet it had a meaningful impact. So if you can see those positive impacts from just one show, just imagine how much of an impact that you have with magazines and videos and so forth. And look at, and the brothers were talking about how young brothers and sisters refer to each other with the B word, with the N word. Look, how many videos are there out there and songs are there out there that make it seem as if the only value that a man has to a woman is to be a paycheck, and the only value that a woman has to a man is to be a sex object. And if you're destroying and distorting how we interact with each other in our community in a negative fashion, then guess what happened? We don't get a chance to build networks. We don't get a chance to build relationships. We don't get a chance to build families. We don't get a chance to build communities. And based on that fact, I'm going to let you into a little fact. I have half my practices in the federal court is in the state court. And all the state court is the minor league system for the federal court. So I have these young brothers that come to me on these drug cases, and truth be told, hey, it's like taking candy from a baby. I'm not talking about from them. I'm talking about going into court and fighting the state's attorney because the cases are not as well prepared. So I win the majority of those cases. And the ones I don't win, I'm able to get favorable plea bargains for those kids. Problem is, once they get one federal drug conviction, the minute they get brought into a federal drug conspiracy, you're talking about mandatory minimums, you're talking about doubling those mandatory minimums. So if they walk in the door with the mandatory minimum of 5 years, it's now 10. If they walk in the door as a mandatory minimum of 10 years, it's now 20. And I'm gonna let them into another little secret. A lot of these young brothers don't understand this. They think, oh, well, I'm never gonna snitch on my brother. Well, guess what? Every case I've been on, federal drug case I've been on, somebody's flipping. And the reason they're flipping is because they're being shown all this time. Oh, you got 10 years, brother. That's to begin with. That's off the top. And we're really looking at 30 to life. Everybody starts singing like a bird. You would think it's a choir going on. And the minute they start singing, everybody goes down. So these young brothers don't understand. They are confusing weakness for strength. They're confusing, thinking, okay, I got a gun. I'm a member of this gang. I'm selling these drugs. No, you've been set up. They know that. It is designed that way. It is designed that way, and you won't win. So what we have to do, there are a lot of things going on. I'm not going to say that there's one silver bullet, there's one way, there's one speech, there's one institution that's going to fix things. We have to be resolved to fight on all these different battlegrounds. But the number one ground we have to look at is the images. Because we have to build our networks. And I will wrap it up because, like I said, I know as a lawyer we're used to talking too much. But the one thing I'm going to put on your mind, if we don't talk about anything else, I have represented people from all different communities, African American, Hispanic, white, different immigrant groups. And the one thing I've noticed in the time in practicing law, when I go and I talk to the judge and I say, okay, well, this is a felony case and we're gonna do a plea bargain, and they'll say, well, all right, well, we'll give the guy probation, or we'll give the woman probation. And they'll say, but part of probation is they have these fees. So they're gonna have to get a job once they get on probation, and so they can pay these fees off. Well, I've noticed, everybody else's community, they say, well, that's no problem. I'm gonna talk to my uncle, he'll get me a job. Well, you're gonna have a felony. That's not a problem. I'm gonna work in construction. They don't care if half of them got felonies. Okay. And then everybody else says that, except for our community. We'll say, man, it's gonna be tough for me to get a job because I gotta go and fill out an application and turn it into a stranger and hope they don't hold that against us. That's because we don't have strong networks in our community. The number one way of getting a job, 85% of jobs are done through knowing somebody. But we don't do it that way because we're fooled into believing this dumb stuff about, well, you have to be objective and are you qualified? Look, let's get over that. Let's build our networks. Let's build our self-esteem. Let's build our institutions, and let's build our images so that we can build strong communities. Thank you.
Okay, I think we can see why Minister Michael brought these individuals together, because not only are they thoughtful, but they talk with a sense of passion and commitment. Let me see if I can kind of recapture the comments so we can move forward in a comprehensive or coherent framework. Brother Lance talked about lack of cultural control of our institutions, which has led to cultural distortions and degeneration. Brother Caleb talked about the miseducation of our youth and the inadequate education that we suffer from. And then you had Brother Noon, who really examined the interpersonal conflict that we engage in, the self-hate that we are subjected to, lack of male role models in the schools, and the profound disrespect that we have with one another, and or of one another, rather. And then Attorney Beals talked about the systemic institutional failure of our children, the societal influences that are operating in a negative sense on us, the role of the legal system in keeping us and holding us in this kind of predicament, and then the lack of social networks that make us unable to rise to our potential. Now, in examining this issue about violence, one of the things that I'm kind of struck by is that a lot of people in our community and in the media, they tell us that the level of violence that we are experiencing as a city is, for the most part, down. When you examine the data from the 70s and the 80s, that the murder rate was much higher during those decades. And they even say it was more higher in the 90s. So my question to the panel is that actually true, or is that a perception that's being fed to us that things are actually better now than they were in previous decades? So any one of you all can kind of chime in, but keep your comments to maybe about a 2.
Yeah, I can speak to that. Yes, that information that's coming from the mayor's office and from the CPD is absolutely inaccurate. The homicide rates, which they are referring to, you got to keep in mind, when they talk about rate, a rate is a number. I don't want to get too academic, but the rate is a number that standardizes the amount of a particular crime that occurs in a particular community, right? So that's different than a number. So for instance, let's say I live in Washington Park, and in Washington Park, there were 5 homicides. That's the number 5. The rate takes the 5 and standardizes it across all communities in Chicago. So what's happening in Chicago is that the number of homicides are down. The reason that the numbers of homicides are down is because the black community in Chicago has been depopulated over the last 20 or 30 years by almost 30%. So if you are losing numbers of people, of course, the numbers, you're going to have less homicides. I mean, if you look up and down the State Street corridor, ain't nobody there no more. So of course the numbers going to go down. But if you look at the rate, and see what they will do is they tricking people with the rate. They're saying the rate has gone down. No, the rate ain't down. The rate is up. Because what happens is, if you got 5 homicides and there's 10,000 people in the community or less, the rate is high, right? But the number is down. So just to be clear, the rate has gone up. The population has gone down, causing the numbers to go down. So that is inaccurate information. And then another thing you want to consider is that the overall rate in Chicago of homicide has gone down. So if we got 77 communities, the majority of homicides that exist in Chicago occur in our community, in black communities. Only one Hispanic community is up there within the top 20. That's Humboldt Park. You got predominantly all other white communities, 90% have had no homicides in 5 or 6 years, right? So this is a problem that exists in our community. And in the black community, it's only specific areas where you have escalated rates of homicide, right? So all of those things you have to keep in mind, but no, that's misinformation. The rates are up, the numbers are down, but the numbers are down because the population has decreased.
I'm gonna ask something just real quick. Also, one thing I want to point out too, we start comparing different eras, specifically the 90s. The 90s, you got to realize, especially the early part of the 90s, that was during the crack wars. This was an extremely elevated number of murders, and these murders was based on the fact that you had the drugs, you had the gangs, and with the drugs and the gangs. In the money aspect, you also had these gangs that with these certain allegiances that had been broken up. So gangs who had for years had affiliations or at least a truce going, all of a sudden now became enemies. And then you threw the money aspect in where they were the ones who were controlling the drug trade. And so because of that, you had an inordinate amount of violence. So it's to say, well, we're doing okay in comparison to a horrific period of time, is not really saying a whole lot. It's like saying, well, you're feeling okay. Yesterday you were being tortured. And so you're not as in much pain today as you were yesterday because yesterday you were being tortured. Well, that's not saying you're feeling good. It just means that you're no longer being tortured. So, it's you got to put it in perspective.
All right. One of the other things that I have observed too, I don't know if you guys know, but there's a documentary that's coming out now, and it's on the street. It's called Chirac, and it's comparing the city of Chicago to what's going on over in the Middle East in Iraq. And one of the things I want to ask the panel about is whether or not the violence that we're experiencing now is something that is unique to Chicago, or is it a dynamic that's taking place in black communities throughout the nation? And if there are some dimensions that are unique to this city, what makes it so? Is it the gang culture? Is it something in the water? Is it something in the food? Is it something that is uniquely sociological? Or is it something that may be of a different nature that may be having this kind of influence? And we're also joined by Attorney Lou Myers. I want to ask him to come up on the podium and take your place here, brother. We've been kind of waiting on you. So thank you for joining us. And actually, Attorney Myers, I did give your introduction before you arrived, so the audience is well acquainted with you. But I want to get back to this subject as to whether or not the violence that we're experiencing in this city is unique to this city alone, or is it something that is taking place throughout the nation? So any one of you that want to comment on that, feel free. Okay.
I'm going to pass it down. Real quick, I know I talked too much, so I'm going to pass it real quick. Violence in the black community has been shown. There's been tons of research and actually actual shows on it going into NPR and other places. Violence in the black community is worse in the Midwest because the economic opportunities are worse in the Midwest. There have also been studies that have shown that the worst place to live for African Americans in the country is the Midwest, based on lack of economic opportunity, which is directly correlated with the level of violence in our community. It's violence throughout our community, throughout the country, but it's higher in the Midwest and is directly correlated to lack of economic opportunities. I'm going to pass it.
Yeah, I wouldn't add much to that other than to say that that's absolutely the truth. So if you look at the crime rates, but particularly violence in Chicago, is almost 3 times as high as it is in places like New York and Los Angeles that have comparable populations. When you look at the depression, economic depression in cities like Chicago, East St. Louis, in the Midwest, St. Louis, and Detroit, those rates are much higher because of the industrial collapse, the economic collapse that has occurred in those cities, which causes a depression among the people, which then contributes to the violence and the crime that's going on. So, yeah, there is a direct correlation between economic depression and elevated levels of violence. And then to add to